we're talking about stress, I wanted to go to London. Everyone wants to go to London, you know, that's the Mecca. First you go to London, you make money, and then you go to New York. Or maybe you go to London, you come back to Manchester and say, I've been to London. If you'd been to London, you'd get a better job, you know, because everyone knows how clever people are in London. And so I had this impression that in London the streets were paved with gold, whereas as we all know they're paved with pigeon shit. So I went for interviews in London, and I pretty well had a nervous breakdown, because every time I was offered a job at the first place, and I thought I can do better than that, and I turned it down. And offered a job another place, I turned it down. I think I'd do better than that. And eventually I got a job where they paid me 2.5 times what I was getting in my job in Manchester, with an agency which was bought by this man. Does anyone know who this is? Leo Burnett. Leo Burnett. And you know how I got it? This is absurd, how the strangest... I was carrying a copy when I went into my interview to this eminently capitalist institution, yeah? An advertising agency. I was carrying a copy of Socialist Weekly. Because one of the people I got very friendly with in Manchester was a former member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. And I was always interested in politics, and I was carrying a copy of the and I didn't realise when I got my interview that the lady who was interviewing me was a former senior member of the Communist Party, and her boss was also a former leading member of the Communist Party, and she obviously concluded I was very intelligent, and that's how I got my job. Extraordinary. I learnt at Leo Burnett once again that most of the people didn't know what they were doing, and this gives you an idea of what a shit I was. Somebody told me about 3 years ago that he'd been sitting in a meeting with me at Leo Burnett, and there was a very amiable, one of the directors, a man called Bob Abram, and he said something, and apparently I said, well, if that's what you think, then you know fuck all about advertising, and the best thing you can do is jump out of that bloody window right now. You know, I was very, very emphatic in my views in those days. But the thing was, they didn't know, you know, they just didn't know. The biggest lesson I got there, apart from one other, was I worked on a retail account selling clothes. That's very, very good for you, you know. You work selling clothes and you know the next day whether they bought the stuff or they didn't. That's the closest thing you can get to direct marketing, and terribly difficult. Leo Burnett's agency was famous for their down-home, folksy approach to advertising. And one of the great privileges of working there was I met some of the legendary people in the advertising business. The world's greatest brand in the cigarette business since the 1960s has been Marlboro. And have I done something I shouldn't have done? I met the guy who wrote the original Marlboro ads. They sent some people over from Chicago, and they said, we're going to show you how to do presentations. We're going to do a presentation for you that we did for the Harris Bank in Chicago. And this made such an impression on me. I suddenly realised, you know, these guys sat there and they talked about the campaign they'd done. And they were funny, and they were entertaining, and they were relevant, and they were homespun, and they were impressive, and I thought, this is it, you know. You've got to learn how to sell this stuff, you know. The truth is actually nearly everything I wrote for the first 5 years in this business was absolute garbage. You know? Only wrote stuff that was any good by accident, but I sold nearly all of it. And these guys really taught me how to sell it. I thought, oh, the trick, you know, you've got to say something at the beginning that gets people interested. You've got to say something that they think, oh yeah, that's true. And what they did was now you're probably thinking, why should you have a crazy lion as a symbol of a bank? Well, the reason you should have a crazy lion as a symbol of a bank is because lions are brave. Lions are courageous and lovely. It's absolutely wonderful. All this sort of, that really made a huge impression on me. I'll talk a little bit more about presentations later on.